Tell you just a little bit about the Gordon Institute since we're sponsoring this. You know that when you are ready to go to college, you're going to be working on a degree of some sort. You're going to be majoring in something, whether that be history or math or political science or something else. You are going to perhaps have a major and a minor. Well, we have certificate programs at FIU and at many universities, and the Gordon Institute has 4. We have a public policy certificate program, we have a North American Studies certificate program, and we have a National Security Studies certificate program. All of these are at the undergraduate level. They are less than a minor, less than a major, but they help students to kind of focus on one particular issue. And there are, throughout the university, there are many different certificate programs. And most large-based universities have those kinds of things that are available. We also have a graduate certificate program in National Security Studies, and we are very proud of our certificate programs. The biggest one we have is the Undergraduate National Security Studies certificate. We have a lot of students from a lot of different majors who are enrolled in that program. We also have, how many of you know what Southcom is? See a whole lot of hands up, I figured. The Defense Department of the United States has the world divided up into regions, and there is a combined combatant command that is responsible for each one of the regions. So there's an African command, there's a Pacific command, there's a European command, there's a Central Command. You've probably heard of them. They're headquartered in Tampa. And they're the ones that have been managing the wars in Afghanistan, Iraq, taking care of the situation in Pakistan and that region of the world. The Northern Command takes care of North America. The Southern Command takes care of Latin America, everything south of Mexico and the Caribbean. And they are headquartered here in Doral, not very far from where we're sitting this morning. We have an internship program for FIU students at Southcom, gives students an opportunity to go and have some real-life work experience with the federal government, and it's been very successful. We've had over 60 students who have participated in it since we started it. The Combined Combatant Command term, as you might figure out, combined, it has all of the different branches of the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines are all there. A lot of civilian agencies are also there. The State Department has representatives, Agency for International Development, FBI, DEA, Homeland Security, and a lot of others. So it's a major effort to coordinate all of the assets of the United States government for that particular region. Our program in National Security Studies is our our signature program. We were designated as an intelligence community center for academic excellence back in 2005, and we've been working with the federal government and various agencies since then. We have our certificates in National Security Studies. We have an annual colloquium on national security issues, a one-day conference. We have high school outreach programs, some of you may be aware of. We have fall and spring simulation exercises for students to come here and spend a day on campus and do some interactive learning kinds of exercises. We have teacher workshops beforehand to help the teachers prepare students for those things and give teachers other information to use in the classrooms. And then we have a week-long high school summer institute. which we've just gotten the date set for June 9th to 13th. And we're working on that. We'll be having applications and things posted on our website soon about those kinds of things. And we'll try to share that information as broadly as we can. The idea of the ICCAE program was to broaden the talent pool for the intelligence community, which is our national security structure. It's 16 different agencies of the federal government that all have something to do with intelligence. They are seeking diversity, not only by ethnicity, but they are looking to diversify their workforce by people who are trained in different places. So they used to have, and they did a study after the September 11th terrorist attacks. They decided that they were hiring all the best people out of the best colleges, but they were all coming from like Princeton and Yale and Harvard. And they needed, everybody was trained alike, so everybody was thinking alike, and that wasn't the best idea. So they are trying to diversify things, bring in people from all over the country, pardon me, who have a variety of different experiences and knowledges. Okay, so what are the IC agencies? Everybody's heard of, no thanks. Everybody's heard of the Central Intelligence Agency. What do? What do you think of when you think of the CIA? Spooks. Spies, right? Yeah. They do have that. They are the premier human intelligence collector, and people out, mostly not like James Bond, mostly like trying to get people from other countries to give us information that their countries don't want us to have. But they also have a huge analysis division. They have science, technology. They look for engineers, people with a wide variety of backgrounds. What do you think about when you think about the Federal Bureau of Investigation? Think of maybe domestic federal law enforcement. Okay, they do that. There is also a large branch called the National Security Branch that does analysis, intelligence analysis. They work counter-espionage, they work counter-terrorism. They don't carry guns, so they have a lot of other things besides what we normally think about. They also have people stationed throughout the world at embassies and consulates, so it's not just domestic. They do a lot of other things. The Drug Enforcement Administration, you know what they do. Homeland Security tries to protect immigration issues, border security issues. The Coast Guard is actually part of Homeland Security, but they are generally conceived to be differently because of their operations. The State Department, Treasury, Energy are all part of the intelligence community. They all have some aspects of intelligence work. And then the rest is from the Defense Department, the Defense Intelligence Agency, kind of global over all of the Defense Department. Each one of the uniformed services has their own intelligence. The NRO, I put NRA, the National Reconnaissance Office has satellites up in space, and the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the NGA, takes the information coming out of the satellites and does analysis. And then the National Security Agency, which you may have heard of. We also have our 20th Century and Contemporary Issues program. It's a fully online program. It is geared towards students who are in the International Baccalaureate program and studying for the history exam. Dr. Céspedes, who you're about to hear from, is our instructor on that. And I'm going to pass out a flyer about that. We encourage you to sign up. The idea is to help students achieve the best possible goal in their exams. And that's open now until December 15th for registration. And without further ado, I will turn the stage over to Dr. Céspedes.
Can I have the keyboard? You didn't have any. He doesn't have any around here. Not June.
Well, good morning, everybody, and I'm glad everybody made it. I got lost myself. I was walking right past the building, and then I made it here. Only because Dr. Twigg saw me and called me out and, saved me another half a mile. But I got my exercise in today. Those of you that know me or understand that it's going to be very difficult for me to stay put in one place and not walk all the way around the place as I'm lecturing, okay, because I can't take the microphone with me. Not really. Okay, I'll have to adjust my modus operandi. Did everybody get a ticket? If you haven't gotten a ticket, Mr. McLaughlin, raise your hand. Okay, everybody had a ticket. Did everybody sign in? If you didn't sign in, there are sign-in sheets going around, and Elena, why don't you take that and then Elena will help you sign it. We'll give that. All right. And here's another one. Okay. Make sure everybody signed it. The golden ticket that you have, like in Willy Wonka's factory, is very, very important. Not because you get to go to Willy Wonka's factory and get all the chocolate in the world, but those that are my students, there's a little extra credit associated with that. And that's how I can tell that you're here. If you don't have your golden ticket later, you lost your golden ticket, you lost your opportunity for a little extra credit. And also, I will be using the ticket for raffling a couple of my books out. So, don't lose it, don't lose it. Let's talk about Soviet communism and its impact on world affairs from the start of the Russian Revolution to Stalin's death in 1953. Talking about the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. The concept is that much like, strongly paralleling the United States and the different states that, of course, respond to and are governed by central government, the federal government, this was the idea behind the USSR, or the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Often we just called it, incorrectly by the way, just Russia, because Russia was one of the socialist republics, or the Soviet Union. Established in 1922, now what happens between 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution, and 1922 is that in 1922 you have officially the name Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. By the way, again, for those of you that don't know me, I have everything online. Everything that you're going to see today is online. All you have to do is Google Juan R. Céspedes, or go to academia.edu or Google Docs, and you'll see it there. What is valuable to you is the little tweaks that I give what I have here. I often don't just repeat what's written there because that would be boring and you could just sit down and copy it yourself. But I give it some tweaks. So, main idea here is that the USSR is established officially in 1922, and of course, you know that with Mr. Gorbachev and his earth-changing, earth-shattering reforms, it dissolves in 1991. But this is the first state to be based on Marxist principles. No, I can't walk around. You've got to stay still, Céspedes. That's life. Okay, I am tied down. The voice will carry? You think so? Okay, let's try that. I don't know, what the heck. Worst things have happened, right? 1, 2, 3. Yes, in the back? Great. I got a thumbs up from the back. Ah, I feel so much better now. I felt I was like, Last lecture I did, I was just like, I don't know if you noticed, I was gripping the podium because I wanted to get away from the podium. Okay, feels so much better now. Okay, USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Marxist principles, that's what I was talking about. Okay, the Marxist principles basically are the abolition of private property. This is based on the ideas of Karl Marx, refined by Karl Marx and then refined by Lenin. And what I'm going to need, however, is, let's see, how can I change from one to the next?
Space.
I guess so. I'll have to do it myself. So anyway, total absence of private property, collectivization of everything, and total absence of private property. Okay? So the world, as you understand it, and have been born into, and have grown up in, and so forth, does not exist, or did not exist in the Soviet Union. Everything is collectivized. All the factors of production are collectivized. The factors of production, if you'll recall from your basic economics, is what will be produced, who will produce it, how it will be distributed, how it will be priced. All of those seemingly chaotic decisions are taken care of by the market. Okay? But they're not chaotic. The market takes care of them quite well. With a few exceptions. The market will take care of those. And in the Soviet Union, it's the government that decides what will be produced, how it will be produced, how it will be distributed, how it will be priced, and so forth. Okay? The Communist Party, 2.1, the Communist Party is in charge of everything. The Communist Party is not a political party as we understand it, but a governing agency that will direct what happens in education, what happens, for example, workers are expected to devote X number of hours a week or a month or a timeline to studying Marxist principles, because that will inspire them to produce further. These socialist republics, as you see, 15 constituent republics in 1940, all send representatives to the Supreme Soviet, and much like Congress, the Supreme Soviet should take into consideration what they have in mind and their needs and so forth, and then pass legislation that favors their constituencies. Okay? That did not always happen. The real power was in a small group called the Politburo and the General Secretary. These were really the movers and shakers within the Supreme Soviet. If the Politburo wanted it done, it got done. There is a theme in Marxism called democratic centralism. Democratic centralism sounds almost like an oxymoron, but it really does wind up being an oxymoron, because what happens is that supposedly, okay, each communist party will decide, the Soviet party of, the Communist Party of Azerbaijan, of Ukraine, of Belarusia, they will decide on certain policies. They'll bring their concerns to the Supreme Soviet, and then things will be debated and finally ironed out, and then they will decide eventually what will happen. In practice, the reverse happened. The Supreme Soviet decided what was going to happen. Actually, the men in the Politburo, the aged, the old men in the Politburo that had a vested interest in keeping the status quo, they decide what's going to happen. And it was an inverse funnel. Okay, from the top, it went to the bottom, and it would be the responsibility of the Socialist Republic of Azerbaijan to follow what the Supreme Soviet said, or the ones in Georgia or so. So it was the reverse of what you would expect. Okay. This egalitarian society where everything was on paper equally distributed, and everyone is property less because everything belongs to, quote unquote, the people. Okay. After all, their philosophy would be, if you go to the Grand Canyon, does not the Grand Canyon belong to all of us equally? Does it not? Of course, you'd be hard pressed. But I can't take a piece of the Grand Canyon with me, unless I'm going to make Ranger Smith very angry, and probably he will find me and even put me in the pokey. it belongs to all of us equally, and that's the argument they would use for this supposedly egalitarian society. In reality, it was not so egalitarian. Those republics that were west towards Western Europe, or in this case actually Eastern Europe, those republics were favored. The Slavic people, the European-looking people, were highly favored, as opposed to as you go east in the USSR, you have more Asiatic faces. As you go south and east, you have more Arabic-looking faces. And these republics were favored well, by far they were favored. So much so that if you do a little research, some really nasty ecological things happened. You will have as nuclear technology is being developed, you will have nuclear waste being shipped east, and not necessarily put in a mile deep mine, but just thrown about. And of course, in a highly secretive society, most people would not even know that it's there, but would be contaminated nonetheless, and so would their natural resources and so forth. Okay, this empire is the empire to the successor empire to the empire of the last Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II. Nicholas II, of course, advocates the revolution of 1917 happens. Okay, the Bolsheviks come to power. I'm giving you the super synopsis because I want to get as fast as I possibly can into foreign affairs and foreign relations and the impact on other countries. But I want you to understand what this political animal is all about first. So the Bolsheviks come into power. Lenin would be the head of the revolution. There is a temporary provisional government by Kerensky. That will fail. Okay? Nicholas II, after the revolution, and his wife and his entire family is put to death. Very, very sad. They are murdered much in the same vein as during the French Revolution. All vestiges of the royal family have got to be taken away, have got to be dissolved. If you will recall, during the French Revolution, even the dog is put to death. And it is funny and macabre. It's funny in a macabre sort of way, but understand the dog represented the aristocracy, and someone could say, well, this was the royal mutt once upon a time. And it's a symbol that has to be destroyed. And likewise, all vestiges of the old order, of the old bourgeois order, have to be destroyed. Capitalism must not be. Private property must not be. And that is, and of course, let's not leave out the biggest one. What else must not be? Because there's any brilliant person out there telling me. What must not be? What is the opium of the people that must not be? Religion must not be. Okay. So, understand that when the Bolsheviks take over, Russia is still fighting World War I. Okay? What to do? Because after all, Lenin has promised the three big ones, the three big promises. Okay? Peace, land, and bread. What a deal. This is something that can't be denied. This is a deal that no one would turn down. If you're the war-weary Russian, and by the way, you'll find that Russia was incredibly unprepared. Come in quickly, please, and see Mr. McLaughlin. Russia was tremendously unprepared for World War I. Tremendously unprepared economically, militarily, structurally. It's a disaster. And the war-weary typical Russian wants this peace. Okay, they are fighting they're fighting so unprepared to the point that often after the first wave goes over the trenches, if you'll recall, the World War I scenario of trench warfare, as the first wave goes over the trenches and fights the German army, and usually very unsuccessfully, what happens? Some will be fallen. The second wave is largely unarmed, and they're counting on picking up a weapon somewhere in the battlefield and continuing the struggle. That's not the sort of scenario you want as a soldier. So they're very war-weary. Peace, land, and bread. Okay? They will get their peace, land, and bread. Okay? They will get their peace, land, and bread. The Bolsheviks will give them peace, land, and bread. Now Trotsky is going to fight this idea, but bottom line, this is what they will agree to. Okay? Total losses. Again, this is the fuel. This is what's lighting the fire under this revolution. 1 million square miles when they signed the peace of Brest-Litovsk. Okay, with Imperial Germany. 1 million square miles. A third of Russia's population. They let go of so much of Eastern Europe. It's unbelievable. I should have Googled a map because you can do that. You can do that yourself. Okay. Not only that, the richness of the Russian Empire was also westward, not so much eastward. Only as the decades flow by will they discover untapped resources in Siberia. But remember, Siberia, very cold, very desolate, and hard to get to those resources. Okay? What's the hope for Lenin? What's the trade-off that they see? The trade-off that they see is, okay, we're giving up a lot now, but possibly we'll have world revolution. After all, the Marxists believe in in the Communist Manifesto, what's the adage? Workers of the world unite, you have nothing to lose but your chains. It's not that we're separate from different people. We are all the workers of the world. We're all the workers of the world. And one day, those German workers will realize that they're not that much different from Russian workers. And likewise, Italian workers will realize that they're not much different from other workers. And we will have world revolution. To use a quote, it is how's it go? Two steps forward and one step back. Okay, we're having a temporary setback, but ultimately we are moving forward. Okay? Immediately after this, there's a civil war. Okay, between the whites and the reds. The Bolsheviks are the reds. The whites are a diverse group. Some are monarchists in the whites. They want a monarchy again of some sort. Whether up to when they find out that the Tsar is dead, then they will want someone else in the royal family. There are Republicans there. They want a republic. There are socialists. There are all sorts of shades of socialists in there, but none are of the red stain where you have total abolition of property. Certainly not abolition of religion. Okay? And there you have an image of a very young Joe Stalin and Lenin. Okay. What happens after the Russian Civil War is a portent of things to come. It is definitely a portent of things to come. Throughout history, throughout all of the 20th century, and into the 21st century, as we're finding out in many places today in the Americas, if you have kept up with what's happening in places like Venezuela, in places like Argentina, in places like Bolivia, and so forth. Forced anything doesn't work, and certainly forced collectivization was highly resented. Many peasants would say, as they are approached by political commissar, okay, well, see, comrade, you only have one cow, but if we were to combine your one cow with Comrade Twig's 3 cows, and over here his 2 cows, and those 5 cows over there, and we put them all in the collective farm, then we would have more milk productivity, and everything would be better, and life would be so much easier, and et cetera, et cetera. The typical answer was, I want to keep my one cow. That one cow is mine. And what I do with a cow, it's my business. So collectivization was really resisted by the typical Russian peasant. What is the result? The result is not, let's go back on our policies of collectivization. The policy then would be, let's double up, okay, on having these people follow through and do what we want, okay? Therefore, you have a red terror, 1918 and 1922. You've got to subdue the whites, subdue the peasants that are in favor of the whites, and you have this quote by Karl Marx that is so illustrative of what their philosophy is, okay? And I won't read it to you, you can read it yourself, but destroy the old society. How? Destroy the old society by killing them off, basically. That's how you destroy the old society. And you have this cookie cutter repeated throughout the 20th century, wherever you go. Whether it's China, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Cuba, whether whether it's Pol Pot, the master of this in Cambodia, okay? And perhaps you haven't covered that part in your history class, but you will sooner or later. Okay. Cheka, the secret police. This is before it's called the KGB, the Cheka. Okay, 8,500 executions the first year. These are the official government figures. Understand, people, that these are closed societies. What is happening within the society is hard to ascertain. Okay? This is what the government officially is telling you that is happening. 8,500. Are the figures higher? Quite likely they're much higher than that. Okay? Minimum figures near to 100. Some estimates range as high as 500,000. The more I study this, the more I think that this may not be an exaggeration. There's lots of anecdotal evidence, and anecdotal history is important because you piece together, his anecdote and his experiences with hers, and so on, and you get the big picture. Okay, that's why you study in history class primary source documents. The testimony of this individual or that individual could be during this time, could be during the Holocaust, could be during the invasion of Normandy, and you get the big picture. There's anecdotal evidence that this happens. There's anecdotal evidence that these people are willing to do anything to move forward the aims and goals of the revolution. There's one gulag in particular where I don't remember where it was. I think it was in Belarusia, where the inmates of this blockhouse had rebelled and beaten up a guard and nearly killed them and so forth. The authorities come and decide to put to death everybody in blockhouse number 4. Let's say it's blockhouse number 4. In reality, after they do what their dastardly deed, they find out that it was not blockhouse number 4. It was blockhouse number 3. Small mistake. You just executed 100 men, but it was the wrong blockhouse. Well, now let's do blockhouse, the other blockhouse, the guilty blockhouse. This is the sort of mentality that these people have. They have no limits to their purges and their bloodthirstiness. Okay. This is a period of war communism, 1919 to 21. You've got centralized government planning, and the idea is that the military will be fed first because, after all, we want to win the Civil War. So the results, not only do you have an incredible decrease in productivity, because again with collectivization you also have de-incentivization. If I am going to be rewarded as much as he is, and yet the rewards are the same, and he's not working and I am working, well then I work less. In all of these societies, productivity goes down. In addition to this, the government is expropriating, is taking over vast quantities of food to feed the army, to win the war. And the result is you have millions of peasants that are starving to death. Okay? Europeans are looking at this, and they decide that we don't want to be infected with this red virus that's happening in Russia. Therefore, you will have Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France, motivate other Europeans to create a sanitary barrier, a cordon sanitaire en français, un cordon sanitario en español, to block them off and limit what is happening, limit that to Russia, and let it not go into the rest of Europe. And there you have Georges Clemenceau, Prime Minister of France. This is something that they resent highly. They highly resent that Clemenceau and others, like-minded individuals, are going to try to limit this world revolution that Marx had in mind, and Lenin is the heir to. Well, war communism fails. War communism is a disaster. What to do? What do we do to make people produce more? What do we do in Western countries to entice you to produce more? We do what? No one can tell me. Come on. We give you incentives. We give you incentives. We pay you more. We pay you more. And what are we going to do if collectivization doesn't work too well? Well, let's have You know, if you are, let's say you're in a factory and you're producing, if it's a big factory, and you put in your X number of hours in the factory, well, perhaps you can go home, and if you were a shoemaker, you can still make shoes on your own time and sell these privately. Then comes the new economic policy, also referred to as the NEP. The new economic policy is a little injection of capitalism in the Soviet economy, and that works. That turns things around dramatically, okay? New economic policy. Nothing works like a little capitalism. Okay. So this brings us to the year, and NEP works, it works just fine. That policy will be turned around, however, as we'll discover in a little bit. Okay. 1922, Treaty of Union creates formally the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. Okay. Now officially we have the USSR. Look at what this says. Look at the declaration narrative. Declaration narrative says, the declaration narrative is it's foretelling of the Cold War that will exist, not only as typically it's recognized, you know, during the 1950s and so on, but from the onset of the creation of the Soviet Union. There is this ideological chasm between capitalism and collectivist Marxism, okay? It says that there will be two camps, okay? Of course, from their perspective, the exploiting capitalist camp, okay? And again, from their perspective, the free socialist camp, okay? And, okay, the former seeks to destroy the latter. The former seeks to destroy the latter. This is their words. This is their words. The Cold War is there, my friends. The seedlings of the Cold War are there with the creation of the Soviet Union and the allies that it attempts to make as time goes on. Okay? 1922. Remember that year? Treaty of Rapallo. We have Germany, a major industrial power in Central Europe, recognize the Soviets. Great big step for them. Great big step. Okay? I don't know if you've discussed this in class. I've discussed this in some of my classes. The 1924 Constitution is based on this idea. And I touched on this earlier when I started the lecture. This idea of collectivization of everything, of an egalitarian society, in other words, a dictatorship of the proletariat. Okay? This is the basis of the revolution of 1917. Okay? Okay, let's look at the workings of the Soviet Union. Some of this I'm going to skip through because I got ahead of myself earlier, and I discussed it already. You've got the Congress of Soviets. They all go to the Supreme Soviet, Central Executive Committee. Okay, there's a Presidium of the Central Executive Committee, and that is a parallel to any legislative assembly, whether you call that a parliament, whether you call it a Congress or whatever. But we've already discussed where the real power was in Politburo, and aged men in Politburo. Okay, let's talk about the Stalin era. Let's talk about the juicy stuff now, or the juicier stuff now. Lenin dies, 1924. When he dies, there are documents that Lenin has written that says, I don't trust Stalin, he is power hungry, I don't believe that he should be the heir to the USSR. Stalin will make sure that this does not make the general public. Actually, Lenin favors Leon Trotsky. Leon Trotsky and Stalin will be in competition, and others will be in competition for who assumes the leadership role. The history of the Soviet Union will be definitely one where you get to the top by trampling over the bones of your competitors. Okay? So they are the main protagonists, but Stalin will edge out little by little all his competitors and will be the top dog by the 1920s. Okay? What Stalin uses as a propaganda tool to get to the top is not world revolution like Trotsky wants. Again, that idea of workers of the world unite, which is really, really true to Marxist ideology. But what Stalin wants is, let's build socialism in one country. We have enough problems as it is, right here in Russia. let's not worry about what happens in Germany, not for now. Maybe we will in generations to come or decades to come, but right now let's develop socialism in one country. That sounds logical, and that is Stalin's forte. The USSR, however, in the background, will continue to foment communist parties and communist revolutions throughout the world through the Third International or the Comintern, which seems to be just an organization. At face value, seems to be an organization of people that are just interested in communist ideology and collectivization, but really they are the mouthpiece of the Soviet Union. Understand that the Comintern is simply the mouthpiece throughout the 20th century of the Soviet Union. If the Soviet Politburo says jump, they say how high, and they try to convince the rest of the world, the other communist parties, of the legitimacy of those policies. Okay? Okay. Then we have from 28 to 32 the first 5-year plan. Again, these are cookie cutters that will be used throughout the world, whether we're talking North Korea, Cuba, the Soviet Union. 5-year plan. Everything is centrally determined. All the factors of production questions are decided by the government. And since Russia, Stalin recognizes is backwards in so many ways, we are going to emphasize the production of capital goods as opposed to consumer goods. Heavy industry, okay? The exploration of oil, the development of steel industries, the development of heavy machinery, okay? Again, collectivization is imposed, and there is opposition, not only because the things that you value are not only taken away from you, but with this de-incentivization that occurs naturally, with this emphasis on the production of heavy machinery and steel and so forth, consumer goods are being ignored largely. So the typical Russian finds it difficult to find a toothbrush, to find a comb, to find soap, to find toilet paper. The things that you take for granted are often disappearing. And also remember staples, with a decrease in production, staples are also more and more scarce. Okay? There is one section that seems to be, one section of society that seems to be really reluctant, indeed resistant to accepting collectivization. And these are peasants that are a little better off than the typical Russian peasant. That class is called the kulaks. Okay? The Soviets decide to liquidate the kulaks as a class. Let me let that sink in a little bit. To liquidate is a euphemism for kill them. Kill them. Genocide, ladies and gentlemen. A word that has happened, that has gotten a lot of traction now in the late 20th century and the 21st century. Genocide is happening there. More than 5 million peasants, households. So it could be a household with 2, 3 people, 5 people, or more than 5 million. No, they are eliminated. If they are lucky, they are sent to forced labor camps in Siberia, again to develop the vast resources of Siberia. Okay, leads to further famine in 32 to 33. Something that the world largely is unaware of at that time period and will not know for decades to come. Yes, you've got to really calculate your question. Okay. Yeah, the world is unfamiliar with this for decades to come. Okay? 99% of the land is cultivated by the end of the 1930s. They have achieved their goal of collectivization. Okay? It is seen by the unknowing West, this is seen as a success. Many communist parties in the West are looking and saying, things seem to be working in the Soviet Union. They are unaware of the background information. Okay? Raw materials are sold to the West in exchange for hard currency to further develop their industries and their infrastructure and their economy. Especially, I'm getting perhaps a little ahead of myself, they especially deal a lot with one nation that will be their adversary in the not too distant future. Anybody know what that nation happens to be? No, it is Germany. In the not too distant future, it will be Germany. World War II. World War II. That's a good guess, though. That's a good guess. That would be the longer, just more distant. Okay? And of course, you have the uber nanny state where everything that the government takes care of. So, okay. Other elements within this collectivized uber nanny state, uber German for maximum. Okay. 1953. By 1953, Stalin's death. That's the number of KGB. Okay. They do increase their literacy rate. They do increase a lot of things. The question you have to ask yourself is, as a thinking individual and a rational individual, and hopefully as an individual that values democracy and individual freedom and human dignity, the question you have to ask yourself is, would you give up totally your freedom to be taken care of? In a perfect, and this is not a perfect society. Okay, this is a highly imperfect society, and it is not an egalitarian society. To use a phrase from Orwell's Animal Farm, some of the animals are more equal than others. Okay? But would you give up all of your individual freedoms to be a caged bird? Most rational people, I dare say, would say religion is persecuted. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, all that is everything that we would consider our constitutional rights down the toilet. At least 20 million Christians are put to death. Churches are desecrated. Okay, churches are turned into warehouses, into stalls for animals. Okay, purges are a daily occurrence under Stalinist life. Okay. 1936, the Stalinist Constitution is issued. You should take a look at it. I'm not going to delve into it because again, it's not germane to the lecture that we're having. The Constitution promises all sorts of beautiful things. It is just a document. If you don't follow it, what good is it? Okay. We also have the development of a cult of personality. Stalin is everything. Stalin is a deity. Stalin is the gardener of human happiness. That's one of my favorite ones, most macabre. The wisest of the wise, etc. Okay? Total control of it. And here you have an image, okay, 1951, okay, a spontaneous parade of women that are spontaneous. I'm glad to see at least one grin with the idea of spontaneous. Nothing is spontaneous, or nothing was spontaneous in the Soviet Union. Nothing is spontaneous today in Cuba. Okay? And of course, everybody loves Stalin. Stalin was great. Okay? Purges are, as I said, a fact of life throughout the Soviet Union, but in particular, the heaviest purges were from 36 to 38. Okay? Detained 1.5 million people, shot, okay? Given summary execution. And usually the KGB is the juror, the judge, and the executioner, all in one. Bang, 9mm heading. Okay. An average of 1,000 executions a day. Let's compare that to the evil, terrible Tsar. I'm being slightly facetious here. I believe in democracy. I love individual freedom. But under the Tsar, the terrible Tsar, according to the Marxists, he was terrible. Okay. The Tsar also executed many people, many political prisoners, almost 4,000. But if you take the average, it's less than 1 execution per week, as opposed to, in other words, what happened to the Russian people has happened to the Cuban people, has happened in so many other places. They went, to use an old term, they went from the skillet directly into the fire. Okay. The pretext for these murders was the murder, and I call them murders, I don't call them liquidations or executions and so forth. I think that liquidation or any other thing is a terrible dastardly euphemism. Let's call it what it is. When you kill someone without them being guilty of anything, it's a murder. So the pretext for these murders was the murder of Sergei Kirov, okay, a member of the Politburo, who was casting a shadow on Stalin's greatness. Stalin probably had him put to death, but that was a good excuse to have a purge and find out who were the terrible murderers of Kirov. And then you have show trials where people will go before the judge, and this is repeated again in Cuba with General Ochoa and in so many other places. It certainly happened in Nazi Germany, where people will confess their guilt, knowing that they have 9 out of 10 chances of being put to death regardless, but they will publicly confess their guilt, only because they know that if they don't, there's always someone you love behind you that could be taken and put into arrest and killed as well. Okay. Foreign relations, pre-World War II. When you have in the Constitution wording that says the West is our enemy, and there's an ideological struggle going on, of course that there will be a situation where there's hostility and distrust. Okay? Some of this is ameliorated a little bit by Lithinon, okay? Where you get entry into the League of Nations and the recognition by the United States. So they learn the lesson, and then by the mid-1930s, they're trying to cultivate friendlier relations. Again, socialism in one country. Don't worry about us fomenting trouble in your country. We need to build socialism in our own country. Okay? They also have to make alliances with other bourgeois political parties. Why? Why these alliances? Because there is a competing ideology that is rising. Competing ideology that people are turning to during the 1930s when the economy worldwide is in the dump. The ideology? No idea of the ideology. The competing ideology, whereby they need to set up, they being the communists, the Marxists, need to set up temporary alliances with the West, with the capitalist West, and their political parties. What is that political ideology on the horizon? Fascism. Yeah. So temporarily, okay, back to the 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Okay, we're still going forward with our plans to spread Marxism throughout the world, but we need to take care of the fascists first. Okay, and you will have things like the Spanish Civil War, where the gloves are taken off, and on one side of the arena, you have the nationalists under Franco, and they are, of course, they're funded by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. And on the other side, you'll have the Republicans, and they are funded by the Soviet Union, and increasingly so, And by the end of the Spanish Civil War, it is not, as you see so often, and here I am on a soapbox, but I think rightfully so, with correct data. By the end of the Spanish Civil War, it is not a battle between democracy and fascism, as it is so often painted, by a battle between the communists and the fascists, unfortunately for the Spanish people. So much so that when the Republic is finally destroyed by the nationalists, by the pro-fascist nationalists, look what happens. The gold of Spain by the Republican government is sent to where? Their closest ally, the Soviet Union. Okay? Munich Pact. We have, a schism between the West, a further schism between the West and the Soviets. Okay? The Russians are not included in the Soviet Pact. In the Soviet Pact, in the Munich Pact. Okay? Again, in case you have forgotten, Munich is where Czechoslovakia surrenders the Sudetenland. Okay? So, now we have a shrewd man that will be in the driver's seat for the longest time. Okay? Foreign Minister Molotov. Very shrewd man. And he will do a lot for Stalin. And because of that, he will never be purged by Stalin. Okay? He will be, for example, his name is attached to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Okay? Molotov-Ribbentrop, where Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia will secretly conduct negotiations to carve up Poland. Okay? This, in effect, precipitates World War II. So much so that by the 1st of September of '39, you know what hits the fan, the Germans invade Poland, and just a few days later, to help their comrades in Poland, of course, the Soviets invade the other half of Poland, and at the same time swallow up Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia. These will become socialist republics as well. Voluntarily, of course. Hope you notice my sarcasm. Russia will also pick a fight with Finland. They will make territorial demands, okay, called the Winter War. The Germans are watching carefully how badly the Russian army is doing in the Winter War. The Russian army has been purged through the many purges that Stalin had, and it is quite weak. They do very badly. Eventually, they will do better, and they will meet their goals only because of sheer numbers that they're throwing against the Finns. Okay? The world is outraged at this. The League of Nations finds this illegal and expels the Soviets in December of '39. The Soviets basically, it's a slap on the wrist for their dastardly deed. Okay? Finland will cede this territory, as I said. This will become, again, part of the Soviet Socialist Republics. Okay? The war starts, 1940. Romania is also forced to cede territory. Okay? And the Soviets have not forgotten the other side of the world. Conflict with Japan. Before or after one taking a break? A little tiny break. Just a 5-minute break. Okay? Conflict with Japan. You also have an expansionist empire in the Far East. And remember, they share a border. They share a border because Japan is where? Manchuria is correct. Okay? There will be many skirmishes, and perhaps skirmishes. They're fighting. They're fighting off and on. It's not all in all war, but there are skirmishes with increasing intensity. Okay, culminating in the Battle of Kharkov, 1939, where Japan is terribly defeated by the Soviets in this battle. You see, for the military historians, you see for the first time those Japanese tactics of mass waves and suicidal waves against fortified positions, and the Soviets are only too happy to mow them down as they're coming across the field. And the Japanese are just terribly bold. This forces them to go and sign the peace, a peace treaty with Japan, a treaty of non-aggression, and this is good for both parties because the Soviets are increasingly looking with a weary eye towards Germany, okay, as the Japanese are looking with ravenous eyes to the rest of the Pacific, and it's better for both of them to have their rear covered and taken care of in that regard. Of course, this is like all things in politics today. You are my ally, tomorrow you're my friend, and vice versa. Okay? This is probably, most likely, a Soviet propaganda photograph. Most likely, a Soviet propaganda. But it gives you an idea. It gives you an idea. Soviet infantry with their Mosin Nagant rifles following a Soviet tank. Okay? April 1941. Soviet-Japanese neutrality pact. It is signed. And there you have a very happy Joe Stalin, center, right-hand side, and Molotov, center, left-hand side. 34 to 41. As I was saying earlier, the Soviets are selling more and more and more to the West to have exchanges of hard currency and build up their infrastructure. Germany has been one of their prime economic partners, okay? But you know what hits the fan on the 22nd of June of 41. Soviets are totally caught by surprise. It is said that Stalin spends a week in utter shock and he can't react. And he's locked himself in his room, and his ministers are knocking on the door because no one dares move, no one dares do anything without, you know, Stalin. Okay, the great Stalin. The great Stalin can't react, and he's there, he is depressed. He finally comes out of it, but look what happens. Romania, Finland, Hungary, Slovakia, Italy, they're all joining in the invasion of the Soviet Union. Okay, the Germans have overrun vast tracts of the Soviet Union. The Russian armies are reeling and retreating. Hundreds of thousands of men and millions of rubles. Men are captured and millions of rubles in material are captured as well or destroyed. And the old Chinese adage, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is what's happening as Germany pummels the Soviets. Okay. Spain, of course, being neutral. Technically, it is neutral during the war. At this time, Franco has won. Franco is playing a game right now with Hitler, where he is neutral, and he got the help he needed through the Spanish Civil War. He is basically. A couple more slides, and we'll take a small break. Okay. And 36.1 is what I mentioned earlier. Okay. Okay. Throughout the war and in the post-war years, there's a series of important conferences. Okay. They're called the Moscow conferences. And they have, this is during the war and post-war years. They go from 41 to 47. 41, Lend-Lease. Remember, the United States is going to send several billions of dollars worth of material to the Soviets to keep them in the fight. 42, they're discussing the opening of a second front. It is being discussed. No second front yet. There is no Normandy. There is no invasion of Italy, not yet. Okay. 43, they will help establish and they will be part of the United Nations. That's the pledge. It will happen. It will happen. They will be part of course, an important part of the United Nations, and they will exercise their veto power often to stop the United States with its foreign policy. 44, they discuss what they will do with Poland, Bulgaria, Yugoslavia, and Eastern Europe after the war. Okay? 45, there's called the Foreign Ministers' Conferences. They're going to review what they're going to do during Potsdam. 46, war is over. Okay, we have final peace treaties with Italy, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria. Remember, these guys were fighting for whom?
Germany.
Axis, for the Axis powers. Okay? Finally, 47, peace treaties with Germany and Austria. Stalingrad, 42, the turning point. Okay, now called Volgograd. The Germans are going to lose what they wanted the most in Russia. Propaganda-wise, to conquer a city called Stalingrad, and economically, the oil fields. Okay? 330,000 Axis troops taken prisoner. A tremendous feather in the cap of Joe Stalin. Okay, so it is 1943. It is 1943. And the Allies, which include the Soviet Union, of course. Remember, the Soviet Union and the United States are allies during World War II. Okay? Central idea of taking any test, whether it's the AP test or the IB test or the other test. They agree on a policy that will become most controversial, and that is the policy of unconditional surrender. You say to yourself, why is this controversial? Well, it's very simple. If there are going to be no terms to my surrender, you are attacking me. Okay? Let's suppose I am on the losing side. Okay? I'm losing and losing and losing, and there are no terms to my surrender. I can't negotiate anything. It's either put down your weapons and surrender and accept what I'm going to do to you, or else we'll keep on fighting. What am I more likely to do? Perhaps continue fighting. Continue fighting. Okay? Which has been, this has been brought up by many strategists. But nonetheless, the policy of unconditional surrender is accepted by the Allies, and that's the policy they will pursue as they fight Japan and they fight Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and their allies in Eastern Europe. Okay? Tehran Conference, 43, December. Okay? Who is there? FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joe Stalin. Plans for, this is a big one, plans for the invasion of France. Okay? A major feather in the cap of Joe Stalin, because remember, in foreign relations, the crux of diplomacy for the Soviet Union at this time, for its foreign policy, is to get the Germans off their back and have a second front being opened up. So, plans for the invasion of France. Stalin pledges to join the fight against Japan after the defeat of Germany. Okay? We've got our hands full with Germany. After Germany is defeated, we will join the fight against that. And the independence of Iran, that's going to come up later on in your, if you're doing any contemporary history, what happens to Iran after the war. The Russians will agree that Iran will become independent. And that's going to waffle back and forth. So it's not really germane to our argument right now. Yes?
Is this where they, is this like D-Day? That's for D-Day?
Correct. The invasion of France is the D-Day invasion.
D-Day?
Yes. Okay, 1944. Good year for the Russians. They're slowly pushing back the Germans. So much so that they're entering now Eastern Europe, they're entering Poland and the Balkan Peninsula. 1945, the Soviets push the Axis out of Hungary further, further advance, and march into East Prussia. The Germans, to use a boxing term, are definitely on the ropes by this time. Okay, they're being pummeled by the Russians in the east and by the Anglo-American forces in the west, and not only in the west but also from the south, southern Europe, as we're coming up through Italy. Okay, Yalta. 45, FDR, Winston Churchill, and Joe Stalin. Unconditional surrender is confirmed, and and the Russians are very nervous that their allies, their allied friends on the other side of Germany, perhaps will seek a separate peace treaty with the Germans. The war is extremely costly. The war is extremely costly. Any one battle in the many fronts throughout the European theater of operation for the Allies, any one battle, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 casualties. Of course, there's heavy censorship in the West generally, and in the United States certainly there is. That's not an exception to the rule. There's heavy censorship. The American public does not know about this. Otherwise, it would be highly, highly controversial. But any one battle, 3, 4, 5,000 casualties, is par for the course. Okay, so Yalta, confirmed unconditional surrender is the modus operandi. Also, we will divide, because we see the handwriting on the wall. Germany will be defeated. Again, I told you, they are on the ropes. Germany will be divided into four zones of occupation. There will be war crime trials. And now we've got it down to a number. Within 3 months of German surrender, the Soviets will join the fight against Japan. At this point, the Allies have decided that Germany will rise no more. Germany, at this time, this is going to change after World War II, especially during the 1950s and the Cold War, we want to build up Germany. But at this time, what we envision for Germany is mostly an agrarian society, never again an industrial society that will threaten world peace. Okay, an agrarian society, largely de-industrialized and divided into sections so that they will not again be a threat. Okay, this will be a big criticism of the Roosevelt administration. Some people will accuse Roosevelt of really selling out Eastern Europe to communist domination. Again, this is Roosevelt's problem from the perspective of American foreign policy. This is Roosevelt's problem, but we are focusing now on the strategies of the Soviet Union. So it's not germane to our lecture here. Okay, Yalta, 41. It's cropped. It's small. The photograph is much bigger. It has all sorts of people in the military in the background, from the Navy and the Army and so forth. But you have the big three right there. Okay, Winnie on the left, a much aged and sickly-looking FDR in the center, and Joe Stalin with a very impatient look on his face on the right. I like to analyze. I see myself as an analyst of history, not just as a repeater of stories, but an analyst of history. And I see an impatient Joe Stalin there. Okay? Did I skip one? I'm not sure. No, I did not skip one. Okay? Germany surrenders, unconditional. Dönitz signs the documents. Amen. Okay? Potsdam. Winston Churchill is replaced by Clement Attlee. Harry Truman now instead of FDR, because FDR has passed, and Joe Stalin. What do we do with Germany now? Well, denazification. Denazification. As I mentioned before, demilitarization totally. Okay, certainly a democratization Germany, reparations to be taken from Germany for, much like in, now again, this is going to change, much like at the end of World War I, reparations from Germany. The Russians do this big time. They will literally, economically and literally, they will rape Germany. And they will take everything that can be moved and put on a train and send it out east. And I said not only economically but literally, because in the battle for Berlin, every single German woman was raped, including women in their hospital beds about to give birth. Okay. And here also 47.4, Truman, in very vague terms, says to the Russians, "We have this new toy that we're about to use." He doesn't say exactly what the new toy is. The new toy obviously is going to be. That's right. That's right. Okay. Clement Attlee and Harry Truman call upon Japan to surrender publicly. We have a new weapon. We will destroy Japan. Please don't make us do this. They will. Okay. And this is the transitioning point now. This is the transitioning point as the marriage, this marriage of convenience, starts to come apart ever so slowly at the beginning and gather speed. This is the transitioning point between the old alliance, pre-World War II, or during World War II, to the new alliance, the post-World War II world. Okay? We drop our new toy on Hiroshima, okay? And the Russians will join. Okay? The Russians will join by invading. Remember that the Japanese are in Manchuria and Korea. The Japanese army has been fighting throughout the 1930s. It is war-weary. It is undersupplied. It has lost many, many men. It folds like a house of cards with the advancing Russians. Okay. 2nd September, 45, Japan surrenders. Okay. Another feather in the cap to the Russians. They will occupy some small islands. It will demand to be part of the occupation of Japan, just like in Germany, but the Allies, under the prodding of General MacArthur, will say no. Okay. And there is one of the most famous pictures in World War II and in the 20th century, the official signing of Japan. And there you have, whoops, I got the crazy cursor, it doesn't want to work. There's the Japanese delegation signing the surrender treaty, surrender documents. Okay. In China, meanwhile, the Soviets have been busy as well. Okay, as they move forward throughout Manchuria in seizing Japanese supplies, those are turned over immediately to Mao Zedong. Okay, at the beginning, the relationship between Mao and the Soviets it's not steady. Actually, in the beginning, they never believed that Mao was going to pull this off, and they will help Chiang Kai-shek, but that will change. That will change. Okay. PRC is recognized in 1949. After all, that would be outrageous. That would be anathema for them not to do this. Okay. Also, at this time, the Sino-Soviet Treaty of Friendship, Alliance, and Mutual Assistance, 1950. This is the high point, where they are offering the Chinese all sorts of goodies. They are going to help, and there is a typical photograph of where you've got the big boys on the block, the new allies. They're going to help the Chinese with everything. They are going to give them, and this mutual assistance treaty, economic aid, help build infrastructure, help build industry. You are going to be my BFF for sure. And I'm even going to help you, as time goes on, I'm even going to help you develop nuclear technology. Many of these promises, they're going to backpedal on, especially the nuclear technology one. Okay. Price of Soviet victory. This coup in foreign relations for the Soviet Union comes at a very high cost. At least 20 million lives. That's a lot. That's a lot. Okay. In today's terms, over $3 trillion, probably more, because that's 2012 information. Over $3 trillion. And we contributed $9 billion in lend-lease. That's why the Russians rightfully so say, well, we appreciate your help in lend-lease. We appreciate it greatly. But Lend-Lease did not win the war. You have an Anglo-American centered view of you keeping us, well, we did help, but, they put in the flesh on their own and they put in the rubles on their own. Okay. Okay. As you know by now, what will follow shortly after the end of the war, the cooperation between the U.S. and the USSR starts to fall apart. There's friction over what to do with Germany. Okay, we see again that we don't need a weak Germany, we need a strong Germany. Okay, the Americans and the French and the British will unify their sectors in Berlin and unify their sectors in Western Germany. The question of Austria comes up. The question of how we will deal with Korea comes up. Okay. Soviet domination in Eastern Europe is solidified. Everywhere where the Russian boot steps, eventually a communist government will be elected. What a coincidence. It's just incredible. Incredible coincidence. I hope you notice the sarcasm in my voice. Okay. Okay. The USSR responds to its criticisms of its policies by saying we are being encircled by the capitalists. Okay. They also have people that are troublemakers like Joseph Broz Tito. He is a communist to understand, but he does not want to toe the line in all Soviet policies. Okay. Okay. The Berlin blockade, the problems with Berlin, which Berlin, of course, is in the, understand that if you have Germany divided in half, Berlin is in the Soviet sector, okay? And the city of Berlin is occupied by the Americans, the French, and the Brits by treaty, but they can be blocked off. And that's the problem with the Berlin blockade. 49, you have a 30-year friendship treaty with the People's Republic of China. Problem with Korea, 50 to 53. During this time, during these wars and these entanglements that they have, what are the main goals? Reconstruct, after these tremendous losses in World War II, reconstruct the Soviet economy. Okay? Stalin wants to further strengthen his rule over Russia. Continue with the 5-year plans and continue with the emphasis on heavy industry. He will continue with his purges. Anyone that is suspected even of being against the government is sent to a forced labor camp or liquidated. People that have been contaminated by Western influence, like soldiers that were captured by the Germans, also forced labor. Soldiers that had friendly relations, well, usually officers in this case, with Allied officers. They came into contact with Allied officers. Those are suspected as well. And we're going to develop the military and especially develop the Navy because they realize that they're basically a land power. And to be a global power, you need a strong Navy. Okay. They have the same problems with collectivization. They often blame this on weather. The weather is bad often, yes. There are, there's pestilence and so forth, but collectivization is the main problem. Okay. And the main problem for us is that in 1949, they developed the A-bomb as well. And 61 is what I was just mentioning about soldiers and ethnic minorities coming in contact with the West. Okay. During this time period, there's also an increase in anti-Semitic purges. There is an emphasis on being proud of everything Russian and everything connected to Russia. Some of it gets to a silly level where Russians have invented everything, including, as I said, even baseball. Okay. March 3rd, 1953, Stalin dies. There is another power struggle. Who will succeed him? The Politburo is afraid that his right-hand henchman, Beria, which was the chief of the KGB, will rise to power, and that they will have another Stalin in place. They are tired of this. So Beria is arrested on trumped-up charges. Okay? He is found guilty, and executed as well. And there is history of the Soviet Union, 1917 to 1953. this is what you always do. This is Khrushchev, as you know, he will denounce Stalin's excesses. Así estás enda. Okay. And with that, I turn it over to Dr. Tree.
Okay, I'm not going to keep you too long with this, but I'm going to cover just a couple of things and move into a slightly different part of the world when it comes to the Cold War and communism. I checked out a few books about this area and this era in preparing this. In 1917, the Russian Revolution occurred. The Tsar was thrown out of power, and a civil war ensued. The Bolsheviks were not the biggest group, they're not the strongest group at first, but eventually they won. And very shortly after they really consolidated power, there was a big meeting of people in charge of various countries in the area, and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was created. Okay, and you see Russia's a pretty big country to start with, and adding on these other little pieces really make the Soviet Union a massive country. Then after World War II, the Soviets managed to stay in various parts of East Germany, or East Europe. There were little insurrections supported by the Russian troops. There were requests that from the new governments that the Russians stay, that the Soviet troops stay there, and all of a sudden you had even more of the world that's part of the communist bloc. Then in 1949, you had the China situation. The Chinese Communist Party had been fighting with the nationalist Chinese, trying to take over. It was very important. Finally, the Chinese Communist Party pushed out the troops and government that had been running China. The fighting had been going on for several years. The United States supported nationalist China, and the Soviet Union supported the communists. However, the Soviet Union did not provide as much support to the Chinese communists as it could have. The United States didn't support the nationalists as much as we could have, particularly when the Marshall Plan was set in place in Europe to dump a whole lot of money into the economies of the countries that have been beaten up so badly during World War II and try to keep them out of communist hands. We weren't really trying to support the nationalists financially and militarily as much as we perhaps could have. The Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin didn't trust Mao Zedong, who was the leader of the Chinese communists. He didn't believe that that Mao was using the proper communist ideology. The ideology of communism is that communism would be the proletariat, the factory workers, fighting against the bourgeoisie, the people who were the capitalists who owned the factories. They didn't have a lot of factories. They didn't have like any factories in China. It was all peasantry. And so Mao switched the gears around and he said it's the peasantry against the cities. And he fought a different kind of a war. Stalin looked at that, and he looked at Tito in Yugoslavia, and he said, Mao is going to be another Tito. He's not going to be in the communist branch under the Soviet Union the way we might want them to be. So, in 1945, when President Roosevelt and Prime Minister Churchill and Joseph Stalin met in Yalta and they discussed the impending defeat of Germany, they also agreed, in order to get Russia, the Soviets, to agree to go into the war against Japan once Germany surrendered. They agreed that the Soviets would be able to take over Manchuria, part of China. That was part of the deal. Stalin didn't think the Chinese were going to be able to win. The Chinese communists were going to be able to win. And he didn't want to be on the losing side, although he had to support the communist insurrection that was going on there. So it was a very mixed kind of a situation that was going on. The chronology: 1917, the Russian Revolution, communists take over Russia, Soviet Union was formed in the 22. In the 1940s, East Europe went communism. China in 1949, and in 1950, the Korean War began. And so people began to see that there were three worlds. Okay, there was a communist world, there was the free world, and then there was the unaligned world, the third world. And you see that little red spot right there? What's that?
South Korea.
That's South Korea. That's the only free spot around in that big yellow sea. North Korea wanted to send its troops in, wanted to reunite all of Korea together, not by elections, okay, by troops, by taking it over. North Korea was quite convinced that the South Korean army was weak and they would just zip right through and take over, wouldn't be any big deal. They would do it so quickly the United States wouldn't even have a chance to respond, and everything was going to be over. But they needed Stalin's support. Went to Stalin and he said, "Yeah, right, no way." He was quite convinced that the world was headed towards World War III. The United States had this atom bomb thing, which he wasn't too thrilled with, so he wasn't eager to rush into World War III. So he turned the North Koreans down, and then the People's Republic of China was formed. They had a meeting, a big meeting in Moscow. Mao came over. They came up with a new agreement. The Soviets agreed to get out of Manchuria. They agreed to put a lot of financial aid to China and a lot of technical support to China. And the North Koreans kept talking to Stalin, to the Soviets, but not to the Chinese, and kept saying, "We want your support." So finally Stalin said, "Okay, but there's a new player on the block. You've got China, you've got to go talk to Mao. Chairman Mao is the key party in here, because if you have problems and your troops don't take over South Korea as quickly as you think they will, don't come to the Soviets to support you, go to the Chinese to support you. So you have to get Mao's blessing." So they did. They started the war. The North Koreans were doing quite well. The United States jumped into the war much more quickly. Part of the reason was that the Soviets, which had a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations, had found reason to be upset with the United Nations, and they were boycotting meetings. So the United States went to the Security Council and said, "We want to do something about the fact that North Korea is going into South Korea," and the Soviets were not there to veto, and so the Security Council said, "Okay, we're going to do it." So it became a United Nations effort, although it was mostly a United States effort. The United States troops went in, pushed the North Korean troops back very quickly, and it looked like it was going to be all over, but the Chinese sent 250,000 troops over the border, and the war continued and dragged on for quite a long time. So the planning was a little bit off. And during this period, you saw that yellow blob that was communism. It was all together, one piece at a time. Communism grew. It wasn't a piece of yellow here in the world and a piece of yellow there in the world. It was all in one place. So the theory developed, the domino theory developed, that you had to stop communism wherever it was rearing its head, because if one country fell, then the next country was going to fall, and the next country was going to fall, and etc. So we got into this theory about the domino theory. And in the meantime, a whole other thing was happening in the world. Back in the mid-1800s, France started going into Indochina and setting up colonies. By 1893, France controlled all of Indochina. And like in most colonial situations, the victors said, we are the superior people. So here you have the Europeans, the superior people, and you have the Asians who are not superior people, who are inferior people, and therefore it was right that the Europeans should be in charge. So World War II comes along, Germany comes into France, and some people in France decided it would go easier on France, on the French people, if they collaborated with the Nazis. So they set up the Vichy French government, and the Vichy French government ran France, but they were the puppets of the Nazis, of the Germans, and Japan was an ally of Germany. Japan came in and took over Indochina, and they had the French running Vietnam and other parts of French colonies, but under their direction. So the Japanese, who were Asians, were telling the Europeans, who were French, the French who were Europeans, what to tell the Vietnamese people, and the Vietnamese people started to say, something is amiss here with this philosophy. The Viet Minh started back in those days as a nationalist group trying to get rid of the Japanese and trying to get rid of the French, and they began to start fights. When the Germans were driven out of France, Japan began to distrust France in Indochina. They eventually rounded up the French government people who were there and imprisoned them. And the Viet Minh were fighting. And when the Japanese went out, the Viet Minh actually won elections and started controlling things, until the peace treaties got all worked out, and all of the allies decided that it was okay for former colonies to be reestablished. At one point, the British were in where it's the green area in South Vietnam. The British controlled that area. The French were in the top, and eventually the French took back over the whole thing, and the Viet Minh started a war. Now, so we have a situation going on in Vietnam where the French are fighting the Vietnamese who don't want the French to be running Vietnam. And the people who are the leaders of the insurrection are communists, including Ho Chi Minh, who is the main leader. So now China becomes communist, and Mao recognizes the Republic of Vietnam, the Democratic People's Republic of Vietnam, which is to say they should get France out of there, convinces Stalin to provide support also, and now you have a situation with a communist insurrection against France being supported by China and the Soviet Union. Looks a lot like what was happening in Korea. So the United States began to support France. In 1954, the French were defeated at a battle called Dien Bien Phu. And there was an agreement made. There was a big peace conference in Geneva. There was an agreement made that the people of let me go back to the other picture. The French would withdraw out of north part of Vietnam and stay for a couple of years as they got all of their troops and equipment out. They would be in South Vietnam. And in 2 years there would be elections and Vietnam would be united and would be free. Okay? Well, the problem with that was that they had had elections kind of recently, and the Viet Minh were the ones who won. They were the ones that led the insurrection. Ho Chi Minh was seen as like the George Washington of Vietnam. He was the one who freed them from colonial power. So we were pretty sure that the communists were going to win if they had an election. So we provided more and more support. There was a coup, and military people from South Vietnam took over the country and announced that they weren't going to go along with the peace treaty. And the Vietnam War got going. So our support for France turned into our war against North Vietnam. Some of the Chinese ideological dogma that was different was very important. I think I actually already covered this stuff. Who started communism?
Marxist.
Karl Marx, right? He's the one who wrote the theory. Who put it into practice?
Lenin.
Russians, Lenin. Okay, then it became Marxism-Leninism. And then when Lenin died and Stalin came in, he adjusted things and it became Marxism, Leninism, and Stalinism. So Mao Zedong in China said, you guys Russified communism, we need to Sinify communism, we need to make it work in our country. And the Soviets weren't terribly crazy about that. The base was the rural peasants, not the industrial proletariat. They didn't like the idea of changing the philosophy. And then there was the 20th Congress of the Communist Party in 1956. This is a meeting where the leaders of all of the countries that are communist and the leaders of communist parties in many other countries where there's an active communist party but they're not in charge, those folks all met together and they wanted to see what was going on. Stalin had died in 1953. Initially, 4 leaders shared power within the Soviet Union. Purges, power consolidation took place, and by '56, Nikita Khrushchev was pretty much in charge. He made a speech intended as an internal speech to the faithful. It wasn't supposed to get out from those people who were there at the meeting. He was supportive of Lenin. He was supportive of the communist system. But he was critical of Stalin. Stalin had taken things a little bit too far. Stalin was heading towards World War III. We needed to do things a little bit differently. Khrushchev wanted to revitalize the party and move past Stalin and all the brutal situation that had been going on there. So Khrushchev was going towards a decentralized kind of a party system with all the different countries that were there. He wanted, communism was ideologically superior. It was the important thing. He didn't actually back down from the West. He was the one who put missiles in Cuba and made sure that he was, at one point he was at the United Nations and made a speech, and he took his shoe off, pounded it on the podium, and said, "We will bury you," and all these kind of things. He wasn't a softie, but he wanted to do things more diplomatically and move things a little bit differently. So the speech leaked out. People weren't very happy with that. There were debates in many countries. There were demonstrations, major demonstrations in some country that were put down rather brutally. And in China, Mao said he didn't like what Khrushchev said. He wanted to have the revolution of communism had to continue. Had to always be a revolutionary fervor going on in order for things to work. So he didn't like revisionism. He wasn't too crazy about the changes that Khrushchev suggested. I teach sometimes a class on the U.S. presidency here at FIU, and I spend a whole class period talking about the various presidents that were involved in Vietnam, because it was a very long war. I should have started off with who? Who was the first president that had anything to do with the United States involvement in Vietnam? Harry Truman. Okay, he was president when Korea was going on. He was the one who began to support the French. And we had like 80% of the French war effort was supported by the United States by the time of 1954, when the Dien Bien Phu battle took place. In 1954, Dwight Eisenhower was elected president. He started pushing in. When John Kennedy was president, he began to push more military advisors into Vietnam, trying to help the Vietnamese, the South Vietnamese army. When Lyndon Johnson was in, there was a incident at the Gulf of Tonkin where it looked like American naval ships had been attacked by North Vietnamese. That report went out, and then of course, our naval ships were there supporting the military activity of the South Vietnamese, so we were like more than just advising. And then, like the next day, they started saying, well, maybe we weren't really attacked, nobody was shot, there were no bullets on the board of the ships, and ships weren't damaged. It might have been a school of whales or dolphins, or it might have been, you know, we're doing evasive maneuvers. It could have been us crossing our own wake. It really doesn't seem to have been anything happening, but Johnson went to Congress and said, look, the United States was attacked here, American troops are in danger, and Congress passed a resolution giving the president the authority to do whatever he thought was necessary, okay? Didn't declare war, just gave the president authority to do whatever he needed, so the troops began to build up. When Nixon came in, Nixon had a major war on his hands that he was working with, and among other things that he did while he was president, he decided he needed to bomb the stuffings out of North Vietnam, and particularly Hanoi, not necessarily military targets. The bombing went on for months before Congress found out about it, before the press found out about it and announced it. The North Vietnamese had trails taking supplies out of North Vietnam into Laos and through Cambodia and down into South Vietnam. So we started bombing and sending troops into Laos and Cambodia without Congress knowing that we were attacking another country. So Mr. Nixon had some difficulties with Congress as a result of that and various other things. Gerald Ford was president when the United States finally withdrew all of its troops out of Vietnam. And why do I have Jimmy Carter there? The war was over. What did Jimmy Carter do? Anybody remember? Mr. Brooks? A lot of Americans, back in those days, there was something called the draft. And you didn't volunteer, then they needed people, so they drafted. Okay, they said, hi, come on down, we'll give you a physical, make sure you're okay. If you're okay, you're going to put a uniform on and you're going to go to Vietnam. A lot of people resisted that. Some people say draft dodgers, some people say draft resistors, but they made sure that they were breaking the law because they didn't show up for their induction when they were supposed to, and so they went to Canada, they lived underground, some went to jail. It was a major issue, and when Jimmy Carter came in, he said, we need to put this behind us, and he gave a draft amnesty to anybody who had broken the law in that way at that time. How can the president do that? Constitution gives the president the sole discretion to grant pardons. So he pardoned anybody who might have broken the law and went in there, and that whole situation was over. You may remember that Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon for anything he may have done, okay, so that he couldn't be charged criminally with any kind of actions. So this was another way of doing these kind of things. So that gives you a hint about some of the other things that were going to go on in the Cold War beyond the period that we're talking about today. Anybody have questions or discussion? Or yes, sir.
What do you mean by pardon those who were arrested for these crimes?
Can't hear the question.
What did you mean by pardon people in these crimes after Vietnam?
If you were drafted, if your selective service board said, go down and get a physical, and you didn't show up, you were breaking the law. A lot of people did that. Okay? So he did a blanket pardon for anybody who had refused service during that period. Any other questions? About the system?
Satu ya